Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Vivek Joshi, host of your podcast, Aftermarket Champions. I'm excited to be here with yet one more episode. This time, we're wandering off to Europe, where I'm interviewing a friend of mine, Jan van Veen. Jan is the CEO of More Momentum. It's an advisory community and all kinds of strategy boutique in the Netherlands. And Jan, I've been following him for a while. We've been talking about lots of different ideas. And one of the central themes that has come out in the last few conversations with Jan is about the context of strategy in the aftermarket and services growth for OEMs. So I thought this is a great time to do this conversation because, as we know, this is October. There are lots of people are thinking about strategy and business plans. And so, with that, when Jan and I exchanged notes and we said, let's have this conversation, it is a welcome to him to join this call today. So with that, Jan, welcome. Obviously, you and I met a couple of years ago, but for the sake of our listeners, maybe you can give a little bit of introduction in yourself prior to more momentum. That'd be great.
Yeah. Thanks for having me here. We're excited to be on your podcast. So a bit of, let's say, who I am. The red line of my career has been actually three things: service, in consultancy, and being an entrepreneur. And most phases of my career, it was all three, but occasion was just two of the three. Um, Working for the last 15, 20 years with larger B2B manufacturers to support them in developing their services. So looking at service strategy, service portfolio, the value proposition, revenue generation, and of course, digital is a big theme in whatever you do. Um, uh, After a long time being in consultancy, also in service, it was time to do something else, another kind of business model. But also, that's my personal reason to start More Momentum. But also, what I saw is that you can have a great strategy and try to implement it, but then typically you hit all kind of glass ceilings or obstacles. And a lot boils down to the level of knowledge, expertise, and capabilities, competencies you have in your organization to drive the future service organization business, because it's really changing from kind of operational aftermarket function to much more strategic business line. So a lot has to change within the service organization, but also your stakeholders across the organization, which means More Momentum is indeed a community, a service community for B2B manufacturers, actually becoming more and more global at the moment. Um, and we are here to inspire, to develop, and enable service leadership teams, service management teams, and service development teams across the globe. And we do that through through community meetings, benchmarking workshops, and a service academy. So that's a bit about me and More Momentum.
Great. Well, I always ask this question, and you alluded to it but didn't get into details. Why did you get involved and interested in aftermarket and services? What led you to it? Was it just a natural outgrowth of your consulting career, or was there
Yeah,
something
yeah.
that you saw that said, "Well, this is interesting"?
So I don't think it was by design. It already started while I was still finishing my university.
Okay.
And I joined my father in his business in the early times of internet. So that was,
Mm,
let's say, the mid 90s. And helping organizations to develop services by disclosing their data and information through websites, which at that time
mm.
was pretty
That was
exciting.
novel,
So
yeah.
that's already how I got involved, and then I joined Accenture in the service line of business, working with insurance companies and telecom companies. Yeah, and then you're stuck in service, and you keep on developing there. And by the way, let's face it, the majority of the jobs in the economy is in service. So
Correct.
so
It's a
so yeah,
natural.
yeah. So I
But
didn't enter there very much by design, but looking
yeah.
at where service is, that is my passion to see how can we develop services in the current development. So yes,
But when you think about that, you talked about insurance, you talked about telecom, but they're different in many ways from the services that you and
yes,
I talked about, which is when equipment makers sell a machine, or sell an equipment, sell an asset, and the lifetime value of the machine comes to services, comes through opportunities that you can build on top of that. Was there something specific? And certainly in the Netherlands, you're in a unique position where you have a homegrown industry already, but you have access to so many manufacturing locales around you within Germany and Switzerland and UK. Is that kind of how you started this? Because you wound up, my guess is you probably wound up having clients in more than Netherlands, right?
Yeah, well, so most of my clients have been outside the Netherlands, by the way,
Interesting.
but indeed Germany is a big country, UK, France, Switzerland, and what have you. But you're right. That's when I started with Accenture, looking at telecom companies and insurance companies, much more customer service
Right.
kind of functions. While in manufacturing, it has been evolving the last 15, 20 years, much
Yeah.
more into a revenue generator, contribution generator, and also more and more into a strategic business line. So that is a different animal than what I did in Accenture, but
It
that's
really
already
is.
some time years ago. Yeah.
When you and I talked about, we naturally gravitated to this topic of strategy. So when I think of strategy, it's a series of choices on what you do and what you don't do.
Yeah.
Clearly, you've spent a lot of time in and around strategy, both from the product strategy, but also from the business strategy, from the service line. How do
Yes.
people think about it, both in terms of people, process, and technology?
Hmm.
You and I also touched up on this topic recently about remote or connected machines. Um, you know, I'm going to try to put three different things on the table. I'd like you to kind of help me understand how you see, especially in the community, things are going, right? So this whole notion of servitization, it's a big
Yes.
buzzword that's been around for a while.
Yeah.
Certainly, I've been around this notion of connected machine for a long time. Since my early days in General Electric, we had this thing called, we didn't call it IoT, we just call it remote monitoring and diagnostics. And then it comes
Yeah.
back to, if you're a connected machine, there's remote service, right? And then you mentioned the fourth topic of digitization. In my mind, they're all kind of related to the same thing. Yet people confuse what I would call technology investment for strategies. I know there's a
Yes.
lot in there, but maybe you can help untangle some of this mess that I see quite often in people's thinking.
Yeah. So first of all, I think it's good to keep in mind that whenever we talk about digital or connected and remote, those are capabilities. That is something your organization has to be capable of doing more and more. And by the way, we are on a journey of development that is still early stages, how things are going to look like. But that's a capability. So in a sense, that is not your strategy. It's not going to drive growth, but you have to be up to date there. Um, and it will open up opportunities. It could also open up some threats,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to handle that. Then, if you start looking at, let's say, strategy, as you say, that is a set of choices. Considering that there are constraints, there's uncertainty. It's about the future, and one key thing is it's about the choices. How are you going to win in your space?
Mm-hmm.
Looking at winning customers, differentiate, adding a value, and in that sense, being winner in your space.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot about an outside view. What is your relevance to your customers
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
to be winning in that sense? And that is changing if you look at
Mm-hmm.
digitalization
Mm-hmm.
and remote and what have you. Um, but then what is a big challenge is in many companies, by the way, not just service. Most strategies are more kind of plans.
Mm-hmm.
How are we going to do the things? And actually, it should be the choice. What are the right things we want to
Right.
focus on and do? And that's a big challenge we also have to look at when we look at our service strategy and service transformation strategy. It's not about digitalization. It's not about remote monitoring. But how are you going to solve your customers' problems in a better way? And how can you maybe expand the scope of the kind of customer problems you are solving?
Going to take on,
Uh,
right?
because it, because in this whole change going on with digitalization, remote, and now also in more and more AI, that means those are also challenges for your customers of OEMs or
Correct.
service companies. So
Correct.
they are going to change how they run their business. They're going to change the way they manage their assets. They're
Yeah.
going to change the way they optimize or improve their operations. They have to develop other kind of capabilities. So for sure, they will have other kind of needs and challenges and obstacles, and will start buying other kind of services. And now the question is for a manufacturer, how are they going to be relevant in that changing context of customers? And I think that is really the name of the game when we talk about service innovation or servitization or what have you.
You know, I'll ask that question slightly differently in the sense that I'll relate to
Yeah,
something that I just did yesterday. So, now that I live in California, I have the interesting opportunities to go participate in different forums, and this was a forum about vertical software as a service kind of companies. And
yeah,
what's interesting is to go back to what you were just talking about, this, thinking about the value and the value for the customer, what they're doing. One of the interesting strategies that a lot of these companies are taking is digging deep into your customers' spending and your customers' processes to determine the
yes,
way you can build software to help them get better, right? It sounds like instead of software, and like these vertical SaaS companies are doing, your concept is similar, except they're saying, hey, go see what your customers are doing in the value chain and go find a way to plug yourself into that as a product or a service to kind of do that. Is that
yes,
is that a fair analogy, Jan?
absolutely, absolutely. I think that's the essence, and we have to open up that view because otherwise we're as a manufacturer stuck in seeing how can we improve our current services.
Yeah,
Because if you talk about remote service or predictive services or those kind of advanced services, it's still your key function is we're helping our
in your
customers
product.
to have better availability of the equipment or better condition of the equipment. And we can do that way more smarter. That will require a lot of investment. But in the end, the value proposition is the same. So that market is not really growing. So we have to, as you say, expand our view on what are the jobs to be done by our customers,
That's right.
what are their challenges,
That's
what
right.
is the spending now, but also how is that going to change in the near future, because they're changing as well. They're going through a transformation. And that's a nice thing of periods of transformation. It generates so much new opportunities, but only if we have that wider view on our
Right.
customers.
Right.
Absolutely.
There's something you said to me when we were talking about this podcast last week. A lot of what you just said depends on having the right people in the service org or in the manufacturer to think about it in that respect. Now, the
Yes.
controversial question for you, Jan, is you've been around this notion of services or B2B service companies for a long time now, as have I. Where is this shortcoming? Because it's not like this idea is new. We've all had these ideas for over time, right? What you just said. But yet, B2B manufacturing companies have not been able to execute on that to the degree they should. What is it that you think is holding them back from
Yeah.
realizing the potential of this jobs to be done mindset and therefore building
Yeah.
services around it?
So, absolute, there's a challenge there. But I would also like to make a bit of a nuance of are manufacturers indeed too slow in implementing and executing? I think everybody's always anxious and eager to do more than they're doing. And if you then look back, then you do see that actually a lot has changed.
Yeah.
And you also have to be careful in changing quicker than the market can absorb.
Hmm.
So in that sense, I'm not really sure if we're too slow in general, but the pace of development is becoming the main competitor,
Hmm.
competition factor.
Competitive. Yeah.
If you're too slow compared to your competition, then you're in bad space. If you're on pace or higher, then you're in the good space, regardless how mature you are in your current situation. But now back to your question about what does it take in terms of kind of people, and just focusing on the service departments or
Yeah.
divisions itself. Historically, service has been operational aftermarket function. And the commercial part was actually driven by the equipment sales. You had a captive market. It was more or less a given that you need to have some level of maintenance and service to it, depending a bit on which region in the world you are. There are a bit different dynamics there in seeing the value and also the willingness to pay for it extra. But in general, you had a captive market for it. Then it starts developing into a kind of profit center, and not all manufacturers are there, but the majority is there. That is more or less a kind of profit center, which means it generates its revenue, its contribution margin. Although often they're not completely managed as a profit center, which means you can also autonomously make your investment decisions.
Right.
Um, but now we're in the next step is managing service as a strategic business line. And I'm not saying that it has to be a separate division, but you have to manage the operations, the value proposition, your strategy as a strategic business line. So that means we have to have strategic business managers in service. We need to have strategic commercial managers. For most service departments or divisions, marketing and sales is not a very well developed capability, and also not service innovation, service development, service product management are not really strong capabilities for most service departments, and those have to be developed. So we need to develop the teams that they are able to drive that strategy, drive the innovation for growth, drive the revenue generation, marketing and sales. Customer success management will become increasingly important with a wider portfolio of services. And then we also have to look at how we're going to deliver the advanced services. It's not just predictive, remote, and data. It's also software. So that's another DNA. So it's a product DNA, a service DNA, and a software DNA. Because digital, you can't do digital without service and without software.
Right.
Maybe you also have to look at educational services, consulting kind of services. So those if that is in your portfolio, that's a different delivery model than maintenance and service contracts. So where are the people who are going to develop and drive and manage those aspects of the business? We have to develop those. And
It's
that
a
is
full
partly
scale.
looking at...
It's a full scale transformation. I mean, I'm listening to you, and it's all aspects. It's getting the right people with a strategic and commercial mindset, getting the right framework of software and potential technology investments, getting this aspect of trying to think about how best to build this business line, right? It's in the U.S. the phrase I use is repotting the plant. I mean, I think that's a pretty comprehensive change that you just talked about. The question I
Absolutely.
have for you, and especially when you go to the whole remote and connected machine part of it, right? You're now asking people to be technologists when, in fact, most manufacturers are electromechanical companies who don't really have that. As I say, they don't have the gene pool in terms of software and service, right? I mean, software and technology. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I hate to ask this question, but are we looking for a unicorn, Jan?
No, no.
Are you seeing people who
Because,
are doing this?
so let's be honest. So any kind of pure service player,
Yeah,
like lawyers, consulting firms, they have it.
yeah,
Although they may not all be the best example for commercial capabilities.
right,
Software as
right.
a service companies, they have those different capabilities in
Sure, sure.
place to run a service business. So it's not a unicorn, but it
Yeah,
does add to the transformation. It's not just about data and digital
yeah.
and predictive. We have to build the business infrastructure around these kind of service businesses. And that is the real transformation challenge, regardless what your service proposition exactly is going to be, because that depends on your industry and what have you. And let's face it, these kind of transformations, they take
Years.
more than 5 years. They take
Yeah,
10
yeah,
years,
yeah,
20
yeah.
years. Even the very disruptive developments we have seen as good examples in the digital space, also those companies have taken 10 years
Yeah,
to kind of get where they are, and they're still developing.
yeah,
So be eager and be patient. And if we keep on developing, we'll get there.
yeah. But it's
Yeah,
interesting,
so,
right? So let's come back to this idea of technology and connected machines and remote
yes.
service as one aspect of it, right? So I always tell people like, there's a reason when we started in title, we didn't go down the connected machine idea because it's very complex, very difficult, and it's not a value. It's not a strategy by itself. It's to your point. I think you talk about in the context of
Capability,
ility. Yes, I call it ility, right?
capability. Yeah, yeah.
Uh, do people are people still confusing remote and connected as a strategy, Jan, versus
Yes,
thinking
yep,
about as capability
yeah.
investment?
Yeah, and this is not just in service in manufacturing spaces. It's a lot across many businesses. That a capability we have to develop is not necessarily your core strategy. Often they will also not really differentiate because we're all doing the same thing.
Right.
Now, if we all are singing from the same song sheet, then either we have to do it to stay in business, we have to be
Hmm.
up to date, or it's a commodity or a nice to have, but
Right.
it itself is not a strategy. We can use that context to educate ourselves. Okay, so what impact would this have on our industry, on our
Right.
competitive position?
Right.
And now, what are we going to do with it? But so we have to elevate it to that level. But having a plan that our strategy is remote, proactive, predictive, digital, um, that are maybe some
Yes.
elements of capabilities we need to develop. But it's back to what you also said as what are the jobs to be done or the obstacles they're facing, what is their spending now, what is their spending in the future, and how can you be relevant to attract more of that towards yourself.
Yeah.
And then digital for sure will play a game in that, but probably not digital around maintenance.
Hmm. Interesting. So
Um,
digital
and
around what? Digital around the asset productivity, digital around jobs to get done, maybe?
yeah, the jobs to get done, and then also the looking at what are your customers using the equipment for.
Right.
That is in some process.
Right.
So your equipment is valuable for that process, but probably there's more valuable for that process. So how can you be relevant to that process of your customer? Not just by providing great
Right.
equipment and well maintained equipment, uh, but something else.
But so
Uh,
I'll go off on a slightly different topic for a second to what you just said. So years ago, when I was at General Electric, I was in the mining business. Let's just say I
yes.
was in the transportation business, but we made motors and drive systems that we sold to mining companies and so on and so forth. You know, it was very important for my engineers to know what that eventually whether so our equipment went into trucks that went into these mines. It was important for my engineers to know what kind of application it was that truck was going to be sold into. Was it a coal face? Was it an iron ore thing? Was it a deep pit, copper mine? Whatever it could be. And we
Yeah.
used to have what we call resident experts who are 30, 40-year veterans of the company who knew everything. They knew every mine, they knew everything, they knew all the manufacturing issues and so on and so forth. And they were able to not just help us design the product, but design a better service offering for that particular application set. Now, it took a lot of knowledge, it took a lot of what we say years in service to kind of go figure this thing out.
Yes.
And I bring that up for two reasons. One is there's a jobs to be done aspect of it, but the jobs to be done also requires an understanding that sometimes only comes with tenure and service, but could be now in the digital world, could be derived from a whole host of other information as well. Is that a
Yep.
link people are making? Because again, I come back to your jobs to be done framework, and I really think it's a very powerful thing to think about for services.
Yeah.
But in the absence of good experienced people, how do you kind of make sure that that gets built within the company's DNA or within the company's offering, for that matter? I know it's a very,
Yeah.
long
So
question for that.
yeah, it starts at the beginning is that we have to better understand the wider scope of the jobs to be done or the obstacles or challenges or pain points of our customers now and in the near future, which means we have to widen our view on our customers. So we have to have other filters. You always have filters on how you listen to information. We have to widen that. But that also means we have to develop our domain expertise. Now, most companies have a lot of domain expertise around the technology,
Right,
develop great products or equipment or machines
right,
for your target customers. we also have a lot of domain expertise. What is the best way to maintain that in an advanced, proactive, predictive manner? Or we at least are in the journey of also adding that predictability in it.
Yep.
But now we also have to start expanding our domain expertise on the application. How are customers exactly using our equipment? And if they're using it in these kind of customers' processes, we have to develop domain expertise on those processes or that the value chain of our customers, or however you want to word it. So yes, we need experts on our customers' business, which is not only technical. So that is a new kind of profile you should start having in your development teams, because you start with first ideas, first proof of concepts, etc. And then as it becomes more mainstream, then you will see that the DNA will develop as well. My view, by the way, about DNA, that's a result of a transformation and not a prerequisite of a transformation.
Okay, interesting. So it's a little different from the Jim Collins who then what. So you're basically saying what, gotta get this who after that. So it's a little different in that respect.
No. Okay, so I think the who, you have to find the right persons to drive that initial development. Okay. So that is a who question. Okay. But the DNA, I think you meant there the DNA of your organization.
Yeah.
It does come and that is and that's a result of the transformation. But you need to have a few people with the right DNA to look at the broader scope of and develop that domain expertise. Yeah. But there are also strategies to expand your domain expertise. I'm not sure if you want to go that way, but one of your challenges, if you want to broaden your domain expertise, you can bring one or two people, new hires in. But you need to have more critical mass around them, because otherwise they're stuck in a organization that doesn't get it or understand it, is not ready for it. So what you can do then is, if you look for new knowledge, we typically start talking with people we know. Yeah. But then you're always stuck in a kind of current business frame, business logic. So we want to expand it. So that means we have to start talking with other people in complete other businesses or with academics or what have you. And then just ask them, hey, if we talk about this process in these kind of companies, for example, or these kind of applications, who are the best experts in that domain? And then you invite yourself to talk with those best experts. And then you ask them, hey, and what else is important? Okay, who should I speak on those domains? And then you speak with them. And then you ask again, but in this domain, who is the best expert? Mm-hmm. And now you start expanding your knowledge network away from your current suppliers, your current customers. And then you will open up a lot of new insights. And then you have to start filtering, okay, what is feasible on the short term or the longer term, if that makes sense. But it requires a strategy to develop that domain expertise.
So I'm going to...
Or strategy, an approach.
So I'm going to say a couple of things which I think actually feed into the more momentum story, right? So years ago, again, when I was a young manager, young general manager, young professional in the manufacturing world, there was this huge push to understand best practices, to exchange ideas, have networking sessions, and so on and so forth. Now, admittedly, I've been away from the hardcore manufacturing business maybe for a decade now. But it feels to me that every time I talk to the aftermarket practitioners that I work with today, both customers and prospects and experts like you, it feels to me that that last part you talked about is understanding domain, expanding network, understanding the other sources of information and insight. That is a big, massive gap today in how people operate, right? Is that an accurate depiction, Jan, about what you're seeing? And that's why actually, to some degree, that's why I think in some ways more momentum should exist, even though bigger form, because that is exactly what you're trying to do in bringing all this stuff together, right?
Yes, correct.
Characterization?
Yep, that is. So and that's also why we divide all our events and services around a few streams, like strategy, innovation, revenue generation, and what have you. To make sure that we first of all learn from each other. What are we doing? What are we trying to do? What are obstacles? What are challenges? Where are our successes? And also where are our failures? But then also expand, hey, but how are other industries doing it?
Right.
Because if you
Right.
talk about best practices, we can learn from best practices of other services, businesses in other manufacturing industries, which is very useful. But there's also a lot to learn from software as a service companies or from professional service companies or system integrators. So we also, if you talk about best practices and finding that knowledge, we have to certainly look across the borders in complete different kind of industries.
You
Otherwise,
know,
we're just learning from others that are
that's
struggling with
right.
the same thing.
That's right. That's right. And you know what? So I 100% believe in everything you said, and maybe that's why I enjoyed our conversation. But you know, one of the cynical views I have is, again, I'm speaking from the U.S. frame of reference, Jan, so this may not
Yeah,
apply to Europe. The US frame of reference is people are so fixated on this quarter and next quarter that everything you said sounds good, but they say, I don't have time for that. Does that is that just too cynical, or is that something we all have to overcome? Because the service people, especially that I see, is the service business leaders. They're so short of time. They're busy fighting fires every single day, right? Some customer
yeah,
escalation, something, no technicians in the field, parts shortages. I mean, it's just a mess. And they don't have time
yeah,
to think like what you just talked about.
yeah. This is what you call being ambidextrous,
Yes.
two-handed, or
Yes.
and by the way, let's be honest. I think US is or the Anglo-Saxon cultures are strong in that very target-driven monthly, quarterly rhythm, which tends to lead to more short-term focus. On the other hand, it also drives performance on your current business model. So, in terms of exploiting your business model,
Yep.
it probably is not a bad model to kind of have that focus. But
Yep.
then on the other hand, I think a lot of new business developments, innovations also come from the US. So somehow you're still doing some things good.
Yeah.
Now the question is, how do you organize it? One
Right.
person doing both is very difficult.
Yeah.
Um, and on a C level, there you do see some struggles that we have to meet both agendas. And often you see that the more transformative innovation things are not on the foreground because that doesn't hit the numbers, but you still have to create a kind of safe harbor for it. Organization wise, how you typically can do that is that you separate the exploitation organization from the new ventures organization.
Mm-hmm.
And then we talk about the more long term innovations, not the
Mm-hmm.
short term
Mm-hmm.
incremental innovations. And that you kind of create a team or several teams that are on a more entrepreneurial development route. That you earmark certain budgets there, that you also leave certain decisions to them instead of having the corporate management doing it, because they are focusing on
The
driving
results.
performance and
Yeah.
also mitigating risk.
Yeah. Yeah.
So innovation and risk, there is some trade-offs there, and this is the way how you can organize it. And then once that entrepreneurial idea starts to become successful, a certain size, then you can start thinking, okay, but how are we going to integrate things back again?
Right. Right.
So I think it's not bad to have a strong exploitation dynamic, but you have to organize some innovation
Right.
in other areas of the business, and sometimes even completely disconnected.
And that's a hard challenge always for most companies who are trying to balance P&Ls. Now,
Yep.
I'm going to come to try to wrap this thing up in a couple of
Yeah.
different ways, right? So we talked about abilities, we talked about choices, we talked about some of the frameworks and jobs to be done, and how to think about innovation and expanding your service strategy offerings and so on and so forth. I brought up this notion of people and the unicorn, as I call it, trying to find all these things in a way. Are in your experience, both from the momentum perspective and also from your practitioner as the last 20 plus years, have you seen these attributes show up in at least a handful of companies, what are called the aftermarket champions? Do you see them, or is it still like spotty availability of all these things and people in our
Yeah,
organization rather?
we do see uh, companies that are driving new service offerings and growth
Yeah.
by doing these kind of things. You do also see companies that have grown their service revenue from 20% to 40% to 60% of the total business
Yeah.
revenue.
Yeah.
You see companies that have proper managed services, that they kind of manage an operation for the
Hmm.
customers instead of selling equipment. You do see companies that making shifts to let's say more operational performance solutions and educational services. So yeah, I
You're
think
beginning to
that
see
those
it.
examples, yeah, absolutely. But I think we also have to respect, also coming back to your view of we're way too slow. We are on a journey of transformation, which means we will have all kind of change challenges,
Mhm.
and then often we will think we have to go quicker. But we have to be focusing on step by step doing the right thing, moving towards a certain direction in the right pace. You can go too slow, but you can also try to go too quick. Um, it's developing your organization, also developing your position within the organization, be getting on
Mhm.
the strategic agenda, um, and embrace that journey. Um, and one of the things, and it's a bit slightly different answer than you were asking, but you see now more and more companies where service is one of the few key pillars of corporate strategy of a
Mhm.
B2B manufacturer. And then for sure you would like to have a better position
Mhm.
and commitment, but that's already way different than 5, 7, 10 years ago.
All right.
So I think we're on the good direction.
I think if I were to summarize some of what you said is, I think the last part of the conversation is really the critical point, which is a lot of what the strategy is about a transformation of organizations that have been operating in a certain manner and have to change how they operate now. And there's a phrase that I read not too long ago, maybe a year ago, even though this is an old phrase, which is, change happens gradually, then suddenly. So all this stuff is happening below the surface, or it seems like we're really not making that much change, and all of a sudden we're going to see what feels like an explosive change, but in fact has been underway for a long time. And I feel that this business to business manufacturing and related services is in that gradually but suddenly frame of transformation where there's a lot of stuff going on. Lots of companies are doing some great stuff, but you're going to see some changes all at one time, maybe in 5, 7 years from now. It'll all look
Yeah,
massively different from what it looks today, you know?
absolutely. And as I said, even the disruptive changes is not overnight or in 1 year. Also, those took years, if not.
Amazon is 2024. Amazon started in 1994, 30 years,
There
and
you
it's
go.
still changing
Yeah,
e-commerce, right? Let
yeah.
alone everything else.
And the Uber kind of things. And by the way, this is all in the digital space, which
Digital.
tends to go quicker.
That's
Even
right.
there, it takes 10 years or
That's
more
right. That's right.
before it starts getting traction.
Yep, absolutely. Well, it's
Yep.
fascinating. I think I'll wrap this thing up by saying, I think this conversation is exactly uh, refers to me the point why change in manufacturing has been generally hard. There's a lot of moving parts. There's abilities. There's people. There's a growth mindset of the individual. There's, I call it a unicorn, the kinds of people you talked about who can view the customer's job to get done, bring the technology aspect. There's a lot of things you can put together, and it does take time. And in as impatient as I am, I think I have to remind myself that transformation is hard. Transformation takes time, and its patience is what's going to pay off, right? And I think that's
Yeah.
probably the biggest part. I would actually argue that to some degree, Jan, you didn't say this, but I will. My interpretation is strategy is also about patience to some degree, right?
Yep.
Making these
Yep.
pieces fall into place. So that's
Yeah,
fascinating. I think this is a great conversation. So I really appreciate it, Jan. This is a great discussion. Certainly, for me, it is a good way to kind of bring all these things together. I think our listeners will have the same view. So I really appreciate your time. Now, just as a way to kind of make sure we wrap this thing up, if people want to learn more about More Momentum, how do they do that?
they can go to my LinkedIn profile, Jan van Veen, or moremomentum.eu.
Okay. And
And
you run workshops, you run symposia, you run roundtables. A lot of different ways for them to participate.
exactly. And our conferences, our two summits,
Yep.
they're now also going to Chicago and Singapore
That's right.
because in the
That's
end,
right.
global manufacturers and service businesses have global teams.
That's right.
So, yep.
Excellent.
So maybe we should meet each other in person
We
in the
will.
US sometime soon.
We
Huh?
will, or the Netherlands one of these days.
Perfect.
All right.
But it was a pleasure, Vivek. I
Yes.
enjoyed it.
It was a great conversation, Jan. Thank you so much. Appreciate
Likewise.
it.
Likewise. Take care.